What's going on, Frank? How are you, bud?
Hey, Nick, I'm good. How are you?
Not too bad. I know you've been trending on social for the last week, just breaking trades left and right. What can you say about social media and what you've learned over time?
I don't think that's why I was trending was for the breaking news. I think it was for
I know.
angering Leafs Nation. And look, I get it. I guess when you're asked for a take, and here's I think the thing that it didn't bother me, but it annoyed me when you read the reaction on social media is the lack of reading comprehension. Here was my point with the player profile that we did earlier last week on Ryan O'Reilly before the trade went down was yes, I still believe that O'Reilly is a quintessential deadline piece that can help a team get over the hump. But I also think it's possible that you overpay for that player. And when you look at the return that the Flyers got for Claude Giroux last year, I had pegged in that story as, the sort of ideal type of ceiling that I thought the Blues could get for O'Reilly. And instead, what they got was way north of that. And you could say, well, they also added in Noel Acciari. And my argument would be, well, Noel Acciari doesn't really solve any significant needs for the Leafs. He just sort of fills a void, right? He's just there. There wasn't like a positional need to go out and get him. So I get where the criticism is. My only point is that based on the way Ryan O'Reilly had played to this season prior to the trade, he did not seem to be on a path to warrant the type of return that the Toronto Maple Leafs paid.
So let me ask you this. I know we're 3 games through, but has your opinion started to change maybe a bit? Like I know the proof's not going to be in the pudding until the Stanley Cup playoffs. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But has your opinion, your stance changed maybe a bit from when the trade went down?
No, I mean, look, I don't care if he scores 60 goals between now and April 14th. The only thing that's going to matter is what do the Toronto Maple Leafs do in the playoffs? And that's really what's made these regular seasons so meaningless for the Leafs is as long as you get in, it doesn't really matter the position that you're in. If your team is good, which the Leafs have been for the last number of years, racking up 100 points plus, if you don't have anything to show for it at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. And here's the other part and point that I would make is there's been lots of talk, Nick, in recent days of what would the Leafs need to do in order for this trade to be successful. And people have said, well, you got to re-sign him. He can't just be a rental. And personally, I don't see an avenue for that, Nick, because if you re-sign Ryan O'Reilly, provided that he's not taking a 1-year, $1 million deal, which I don't think he's at that stage in his career. And I think the talks that he was having with the St. Louis Blues indicate that he doesn't believe he's there either. Then if you're going to keep him, then you got to say goodbye to Michael Bunting. Like there's no extra room to go around here to be able to afford another $5 million player or $4.5 million player, depending on the term. And so then the other part of it is, well, then the Leafs need to win a round. And if the bar is set only for the Toronto Maple Leafs to win one round, everyone's lost the plot. That's not what this is about. Okay, so you finished in the top 8 in the league. Great. Who cares? You have a generational talent in Auston Matthews. You've surrounded him with very expensive superstar players. If you aren't advancing and being a legitimate threat to win the Stanley Cup, it's not the NHL's playoff system that's broken. It's your roster construction.
I couldn't agree more. And I always bring this up. People bitch and complain about, oh, we should go back to the old school playoffs. It would still be Tampa and Toronto in the first round. Like, that's what I don't understand about people complaining about that. And I think every team deals with this. You're so bang on in that assessment because obviously I live in this market and every day they're talking about those 18 years since this team has won a playoff round. When I think they're losing sight of the big picture, and that's the Stanley Cup. It's not just one round. So I ask you this question. They pull off the big move last Friday with the St. Louis Blues. What else does Kyle Dubas have up his sleeve here?
Well, I think they're in the market for a defenseman to try and add one. I think the big question is how are they able to go about doing it? And I think there's two paths salary cap wise. One I think is much less likely than the other. The less likely option would be to stash Matt Murray on LTIR, basically have him come back for the playoffs, send him to the Toronto Marlies with 2 weeks left in the regular season for a conditioning stint, and then bring him back for the playoffs. And if you're not doing that and you're choosing to activate him beforehand, well, then you can't really go out and trade for someone unless you plan on removing a piece from your roster. And Kyle Dubas talked over the weekend on Saturday about the idea and importance of not trading a player from your roster. So I don't know which one it's going to be. I think the Leafs are playing with fire if they wait until that long with Murray to then try and get him right in case you end up needing him in the playoffs, which is always a possibility, as we've seen in recent years, that I think they're trending towards trading a player from their roster, whether it's Kerfoot, whether it's Engvall, whether it's Justin Hall. The Hall one doesn't really make any sense to me because if you're trying to improve your back end, then you've also just weakened your depth at the same exact time. It looks to me like, Alex Kerfoot, with where his salary cap hit is at, with where he's currently stationed on the Leafs lineup, that would seem to make a lot of sense to me in terms of a piece that they might be willing to trade in order to make something happen.
So how creative can they get? Obviously, you mentioned some names that could be on their way out, but who are the type of names they could be targeting? Would it be sort of upgrades on what they already have and say the 5-6 slots, or can they get a guy who's a legit top four here?
I mean, I think with the way the market is shaping up right now, there's the possibility that they could trade for one of those guys that's a top four guy. It depends on who you like and who you value in terms of their skill set and their game. I don't think Chychrun is really a strong fit. I wonder about someone like Gavrikov just because of the general nature of what the previous transactions that Kyle Dubas has made in his playbook, thinking back to Ilya Lyubushkin and some others. Gavrikov isn't as stout of a defender as those guys were, but would certainly kind of fit that mold. The problem is then the asset and acquisition cost. Like, are you willing to pay up the first round pick plus a third in order to make it happen? And I guess if you're going to go all in with with Ryan O'Reilly, poor Leafs guy, like you have to say Riley and O'Reilly in the same show sometimes. Good luck with that. That I would think that someone like him, if the price is falling, which I've envisioned that it kind of would be the whole time, would the Leafs be in on a guy like Gavrikov?
Yeah, it really feels like a buyer's market right now. So we see on Thursday night the big move. The Boston Bruins get Orlov and Hathaway. What are your thoughts on that move by the Bees? And also on top of that, because obviously we're in the Atlantic Division and Toronto's going to take on Tampa. Are you hearing anything? Because I know the Lightning don't give out much into what they're thinking, but do you know any tangible targets for that team?
Yeah, I put out a list of them the other day, and I think they're sort of lower cost, lower price acquisitions that could be curated for Tampa. That think along the lines of some of the guys that the Chicago Blackhawks are dangling, and if you consider Brandon Hagel and the addition that they made with him last year, really seemed to make sense. A guy that can contribute now, that has term on a cheap cap hit moving forward. So a couple of the guys that we threw out were Jake McCabe on the back end, with the Blackhawks being willing to eat $2 million, Sam Lafferty up front. But then if you find Lafferty to be too expensive, do you maybe pivot to a guy like Noah Gregor, who has a lot of the same skill set in San Jose and would certainly cost a lot less for Tampa? With Boston, I like the move. This has also gotten me some criticism from Leaf fans in my mention saying, well, how come you like this trade as opposed to the other one? And I'll give you a string of reasons as to why. For one, when you consider the price, the fact that Boston was also able to move off of Craig Smith is a really important part of the equation and business. The Toronto Maple Leafs paid first, second, third, and fourth and did not remove anyone from their salary cap equation. So that's one. Two, I think Dmitry Orlov, difficult to compare positions, but the season that Dmitry Orlov has had this year is on a significantly better level than the one that Ryan O'Reilly was having with the St. Louis Blues. An instant top four defenseman that you plug into your lineup, and probably also a pure rental. And the other part of this business that I thought was really shrewd was the Hathaway acquisition. So when you look at Hathaway, I think he's an extremely underrated player. If you've been following my work and what I've been writing, I've been saying for the last week, since we started talking about the Caps potentially being a seller, that Hathaway is an under the radar addition for a team that brings so many different elements that's going to be a very important part of what the Boston Bruins are able to accomplish in the playoffs if they go on a deep run. And the fact that Boston could put Hathaway on their fourth line potentially is such a big win for this Boston team. So they got stronger on the back end, stronger up front, hit multiple positions as opposed to what we were just talking about with the difference between O'Reilly and Achari. And they get someone to take Craig Smith off of their hands. I just think when you look at the relative price paid in order for Boston to do it, although similar, that they net more for their team in return.
It's almost like Boston comboed the Noel Acciari pickup with the Garnet Hathaway pickup. We love those shift disturbers on this show. I know you're pressed for time. Last question. If you had to put a percentage, what's the likelihood the Leafs make a move between now and 3 Eastern next Friday?
Like 70%, 75%.
So
I'd be
it's
surprised
likely
if
to do
they end
something.
up not making an addition based on where they're at and based on the assets that they've already spent. I mean, what if you can monitor the market and find something nice to help your back end, then that'd be a pretty smart way to go about it.
And on top of that, it is a buyer's market formulating. And I think, a good strategy, a bold strategy too, would be patience as a virtue, as we all know. Frank, appreciate your time today. Thanks to us.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, and to continue the conversation, I'm just curious. We didn't even get to it. Like, what happens with the Leafs and their goaltending? Like, I've been confident in Ilya Samsonov all year. I said before the season started that he would be the guy that starts game one of the playoffs for this team. Do you need another goalie? How do you feel about it? And that's kind of the thing that stands out to me when comparing the Leafs to the Lightning, to the Bruins. Then eventually, if you're looking third round, to the Canes. Defense and goaltending, those three teams get the edge over the Leafs every single time.